From lousy visual effects that look straight out of The Mummy Returns to a finale that left audiences unsatisfied and confused. This is why fans hate The Flash. Remember when David Zaslav couldn't wait for it to drop in cinemas? He told everyone that it was a masterpiece and that fans would love it. But as soon as people watched it, they hated everything about it. The movie's a complete mess, and it rehashes a bunch of old storylines that other franchises have done better. I'll get into that later, but first I need to address the obvious: the CGI. There's points where you feel that the visuals are okay, that they're not that bad, and then you see Flash saving babies that look like they belong in the Polar Express. That entire scene was ripped apart by fans on Twitter and Instagram. Everyone was asking one question: how did this pass quality control? They weren't blaming the hundreds of VFX artists who worked round the clock to render those images. They were blaming the studio for a very rushed production. Whenever time stretches around Barry or Batman's gliding through the air, it simply doesn't feel right. What's worse are the Speed Force scenes. Everyone who went to watch the movie was expecting action sequences they'd never seen before. It's a Flash movie, so the Speed Force and how it's represented really does matter, but the movie doesn't know what it's doing with it half the time, and ends up being a visual mess that neither looks good nor tells a good story. Fans called it ugly and unwatchable, and I honestly don't disagree. It feels like a PS3 cinematic that got old 10 years ago. You know what I mean? And even if you get past all that, you still have a story that's been done before. Fans would have forgiven it if it felt like a Flash movie. They knew that Flashpoint was going to be the main focus, and that it needed to be big. Parallel universes, big-name cameos, drastic changes to the timelines, etc. But it didn't matter. The story went nowhere, because everyone knew the DCEU would be rebooted anyway. So, this adventure was to help set up James Gunn's new DC universe. Nothing more, nothing less. And that's why the story didn't land with the fans. It doesn't matter if Barry saves his mom from being murdered, the timeline's gonna be reset anyway. It doesn't matter if Supergirl had an interesting storyline, because Gunn and Peter Safran haven't decided if they're bringing Sasha Calle back again. She loved playing Supergirl, and the role's really close to her hand. She wants to return and be featured in her own solo adventure. But the problem is, The Flash didn't give her character enough time to shine. Supergirl's one of the most compelling characters in the movie, and Sasha killed it in the role, but she was severely underused. It would have been great to learn about her backstory or get a feel for her personality and motivations. But the movie didn't have time for that. Instead, it gave her a "is the world really worth saving" dilemma that didn't really take off. The writers forgot about it halfway through her arc. And it's sad because Sasha's a huge Supergirl nerd. She loves the character and wants to dive deeper into her story in a future project. That is, if Gunn and Safran keep her around. On the other hand, The Flash was full of needless cameos that could have been cut for a more personal story. One of the reasons Supergirl doesn't get enough character development is because the movie needed to jump from one cameo to the other. It used poorly rendered CGI to resurrect dead actors like Christopher Reeves, George Reeves, and Adam West. The studio banked on nostalgia being the driving force behind them. They thought that older audiences, the ones who grew up watching those actors, would love seeing them again. It was meant to connect the DCEU to all the franchises that have come before it. But it failed to do that. Fans were creeped out by the plastic-looking character models. It felt like nostalgia bait, but somehow was much worse than that. Like, it's one thing to get Michael Keaton back as Batman. It's another thing entirely to make a CGI model of Chris Reeves and Adam West and pass it off as iconic comebacks. It felt like a cash grab move. The studio filled the movie with as many cameos as possible and hoped to God that fans liked it. As far as I can tell, the only cameo fans did love was Keaton's. He was, by far, the best part about the movie. He slipped back into character as if he never stopped being Bruce Wayne. When the two Barrys find him in the Batcave, he's a grizzled old man. There's an exciting suit-up scene where he puts on the cowl and teaches Barry the meaning of being a superhero. So, at least the studio did one thing right. didn't it? Keaton's one of those actors you're always happy to see. He brings decades of experience into this movie, and he's a shining example of how to do Batman right. But if you don't have a good storyline or well-rounded characters, then even 10 Keatons won't be able to save it. And unfortunately, The Flash is officially one of the largest failures ever. Warner Brothers lost nearly $200 million because it didn't do well at the box office. People didn't care enough to take time out and watch it, not when social media was telling them that it was a crappy experience, and it'd be better to spend their money on Across the Spider-Verse instead. The studio spent $200 to $220 million making the movie. And as of recording this, it's crossed $260 million. They tried their best to market the movie. Sasha and Keaton were the faces of their campaigns, and they tried limiting Ezra Miller's exposure to the public. But they couldn't escape Miller's controversies. They've been surrounded by negative press since 2020, and none of it's going away anytime soon. The fact that they stuck with Miller throughout production is a commendable thing. They're holding their ground and supporting their leading actor, but people weren't happy with that. They didn't like that Warner Brothers was supporting Miller's career, especially after allegations that they groomed a child in 2022. The studio and director Andy Muschietti refused to recast them and lost a huge chunk of the fandom who never showed up to theaters. Those who did show up were disappointed by the movie's portrayal of the younger Barry. There's no other way to say this. Young Barry's annoying, narcissistic, whiny, and poorly written. By the end, he becomes Dark Flash and tries killing older Barry because he thinks that'll fix everything. He doesn't have a personality beyond making terrible jokes. And it doesn't help that his big idea is to pull a Back to the Future gag in the movie's final hour. The two Barrys, Batman and Supergirl, fight General Zod in a generic-looking desert. The scene lacks texture and feels awfully rushed. It's an empty land with thousands of character models and no real cleverness or chemistry between them. To make things worse, it chose Zod as the movie's main villain. I love Michael Shannon, and he's great as an evil Kryptonian, but they should have gone with a more challenging enemy. We've already seen Man of Steel, and The Flash was a weird choice to bring him back. He's got no connection with Barry in the DCEU, so it doesn't make sense why fans would want to see him go toe-to-toe with him. It's like bringing back Thanos after 10 years and making She-Hulk fight him. But the worst thing about The Flash is that it's been done before. The CW TV series did it during its 3rd season, and honestly, it did it better. Grant Gustin's version of Barry's more likable and relatable. Fans connected with him as he struggled to deal with a new timeline, and then had to let his mom die because the new timeline wasn't stable. It's a good character arc that evolved Barry in a meaningful way. The movie couldn't do that, and that's why fans didn't connect with Miller's Flash the same way they did with Gustin's. The multiverse concept is interesting, but it's been done before. First by Marvel, and then by Sony in Across the Spider-Verse. It's ironic how The Flash was too slow off the starting line. It lost the race before it even knew what had happened. There's a reason why everyone hated it, but loved it Across the Spider-Verse. The cameos in Spider-Verse made sense. They weren't nostalgia bait and were really important to the storyline. The jokes landed and the visuals were out of this world. And the finale made sense. The Flash ends with George Clooney as Batman and not Keaton. There's no explanation as to why or how or what this means for the new DC universe. Is Clooney back? Or was it just another cameo? Is Barry in a new timeline where Arnold Schwarzenegger is Mr. Freeze? The fans had so many questions by the end of it, and the movie refused to answer them. And since the DC universe is being rebooted, I guess it doesn't matter. It's a great cameo, but like everything else I mentioned, it works against the movie. So, from a finale that left audiences unsatisfied and confused, to lousy visual effects that look straight out of The Mummy Returns. That's why fans hate The Flash.